A new generation is now standing up. A new generation is assuming the baton.
All right, folks, we were talking, of course, about the Stand Your Ground rally yesterday in Florida. I want to bring back my panel right now to talk about this even further. Of course, Drew Elons, George Curry, and Shelby Emmett with Project 21. So, Shelby, during the break, we were talking about you saying that my generation is more concerned about other things and things along those lines. I think one of the things that Jamal Bryant's talking about, other folks have talked about, you see the Dream Defenders in Florida as well, saying to this generation, it's time to step the hell up and not just sit back and only be concerned about yourself as opposed to the collective, doing something, and as opposed to just saying, well, mom and daddy did their part, I'm just going to be all about me, myself, and I.
Well, I think it all depends on what terms of the collective you're speaking of. I mean, if you look at gun control in general, in every state or city that has more strict gun controls, you have more victims, you have more crime, and that tends to be people of color, us, black people. I'm from Detroit. Now, anyone telling me that me not being armed or having to have a certain distance between myself to arm myself is someone that's never lived in Detroit. So when you look at these laws, you have to understand that when you're telling people not to arm themselves, what you're doing is you're making it okay for the bad guy to continue to do bad things, and for good people
Shelby,
not.
Nobody said a word.
Shelby,
nobody said a word about not arming yourself. Right. Stand Your Ground law is not about not arming yourself. Stand Your Ground is about you acting a fool when you have that gun. Michael Dunn was armed. Michael Dunn heard some loud music, questioned these teenagers, Jordan Davis and the others. Then he goes to his car, goes to his glove compartment, pulls out his gun, fires 10 shots at the SUV, even while it is pulling away. No one is saying you can have a right to bear arms. The problem with this law is when you extend it beyond the curb, and now you got folks acting a plumb fool out there, and just firing away and having people say, well, I should be able to fire away at anybody at will. That's nonsense.
But I don't think any policy should be structured on the front edges of people that are going to do ridiculous things because they're ridiculous people. Policy should be based off of the common reasons, not on the spectrums of ridiculous people.
I lived it. Segregation was ridiculous. It's ridiculous. But obviously we have policy and people live with that. You know, you wouldn't have gone to Michigan State had people of my generation march and demand. In fact, Michigan State,
and we're very thankful.
Hold on, let me finish. Evidently not. Michigan State and Michigan they would let foreigners live with whites in the dormitories and would let African Americans.
Actually, it's not true for Michigan State. Michigan State was never segregated.
I have checked it out. I covered the Supreme Court, and just like the other facts about the guns are wrong as well. And so, yeah, this generation does have an obligation. They benefited from it, but forgetting that it was young generation, SNCC. There was a catalyst for really moving the civil rights.
That's right. Between 1960 and 1968, SNCC, they were the folks who were 17, 18, 19, and 20 who were on the front lines. What I believe Pastor Brian and others are saying is that it is time for this generation to put some skin in the game, not be concerned about me, myself, and I, and say, yeah, it is a group thing in many ways.
And I think it's also taking a step beyond just wearing the hood. Just wearing a hoodie and walking around saying, this is sad, this is not good, all the commentary that you see on Facebook and Twitter where we are, but there has not been any action. So what it's saying now is, we know that even in the 60s and even today, money still talks. And that's the one thing that we know that we have power to do. Our economic power is what we can do to make a change. Well, we're the ones, because of him and because of others, my mother and everybody else, we've gotten this amount of income in, so now let's make some difference. We're afraid to step out. We're afraid to step out and say we're not going to do this, but now we need to just stop that and just do what we need to do.
I got a kick out of the people who say marching doesn't matter. No, marching and no plan doesn't matter.
Right. Yes.
But the reality is, folks who marched before had a plan.
Right.
If you look at what took place in South Africa was brought to its knees, that racist apartheid regime, because folks protested, they marched, but they also said, we're going to drive forward the economic sanctions. And so that's really what this boils down to.
Right.
And so when you talk about African Americans leading it, it was a group of black Polaroid workers in 1970 who kicked that thing off, actually made it possible. And so I think what Pastor Brian and others are saying is, this generation can't just sit back and say, man, marching don't work, boycotts don't work. Well, fine. You tell me then what you think works. and then let's do it.
I completely agree with the idea that if we are going to come together, it has to be our generation that picks and chooses what we want to focus on, not other generations.
What?
So one thing that I do
First
see,
of all, other generations are still alive.
For example, just give me an example. So, for big instance for my generation is an issue of school choice. Now, there might be a lot of people in the civil rights era generation that say, why are you focused on that? Why are you focused on that? They don't agree with it. A lot of people in my generation, young black people do. You know, we're coming from areas in D.C. or Baltimore.
First of all, ask somebody who believes in school choice, but please show me where folks are being mobilized and organized around that and are mobilizing and organizing the community to drive the issue.
Oh, we're doing that. We're doing that in Detroit all the time.
Look,
we're always
hold on.
This is
a huge.
As somebody who's a school choice supporter, I'm sorry. I'm seeing rhetoric. I'm not seeing the action mobilization.
This is the usual conservative, ridiculous stuff. Look, the fact of it is that most kids are going to be in public school. And we need to address public school. You can have a charter school, you have all other kind of choice. The reality is our kids are not going to really advance till we deal with the public schools, and that's what we need to do.
But again, I mean, I don't mind that. But what I'm saying is, if it's a question of changing the dynamics, if it's a question of that, it still requires mobilization.
Yes,
and what in the conversations that I've had, look, I talked to Philip Agnew with the Dream Defenders and others. Even he understands that young folks, the next generation, can't just poo-poo what somebody else did if you do not mobilize, if you do not organize, and if you do not understand there's a collective involved.
Nor does it make any sense to say, my young generation, we're going to make the decision. That's the problem. You don't benefit from the knowledge of people who've been here before, and then you don't build on that.
I just think there's a lot of attacking of younger people, and I think
no, I think my generation. We're having a conversation because you the one brought it up as if, well, the younger generation, you said the younger generation is more concerned about themselves.
No, I didn't. I said we're concerned about different.
Wait, you didn't say that?
We're concerned about.
Okay, I'm sorry.
We're concerned about ourselves in terms of, which is completely fine because that's what all marches and movements are based off, right? How you're being treated, and therefore how that impacts you. Your family and your community.
No. Actually, that's not true.
If people aren't feeling a direct impact to anything, i.e., hence why we're saying go after Tropicana, because if it hurts the state's budget, if it hurts their bottom line, it will wake up lawmakers, it will make them come to the table, and then change will happen. So all change, all impact happens with this intent of helping yourself first or having a direct impact on yourself.
Yes, but the individual also recognizes the collective.
Just because my generation doesn't want to do things the same way that previous generations did doesn't mean that we don't care.
No, but here's the deal, though.
It just means that we look at it
Here's the deal, though.
differently.
You know what's interesting, though? I got to go to a break. What's very interesting, the folks who were in the Arab Spring used the same tactics that the previous generation did, and look what happened there. But it's interesting, the Tea Party used the exact same tactics. So here's all I'm saying. I just find it interesting that young black folks say we don't want to use the same tactics when everybody else using the exact same tactics.
That's just funny to me.
I got to pay some bills. Drew, George. That to me is hilarious. Drew, George, I certainly appreciate it. Thanks a bunch, folks. Back on News One now in a moment.